The case of the high-kicking horse. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if a horse owner does not properly train his horse and it injures someone, the owner is responsible. Tom Clive, the plaintiff, allegedly was kicked in the head by a horse called Lightning. He suffered severe head injuries and is suing Howard Sim, the owner. He claims that if Lightning had been properly trained, the horse would not have kicked him. Howard Sim, the defendant, says that the horse was well trained. Tom Chive has testified as follows. My name is Tom Tive. I'm a successful jockey who's worked for a number of top horse owners in the country. I'm the best, and I don't care who knows it. Maybe you saw me last year in the Kentucky Derby. Anyway, I was hired by Howard Sim to ride his horse Lightning in the wagon races. Lagdon races. But the first day I was working out with Lightning, Mr. Sim walked up to me and fired me, just like that, for no reason at all. He told me to get off of his property, and he'd send my riding gear the next day. Well, I was so angry with Howard Smith that I decided I wasn't going to wait until the next day for my things. I wanted to clear out that night and never see the owner again. I snuck back to the stable around midnight, and the light in the stable must have been out, so I felt my way to the rear of the stable over to my locker. I grabbed my gear and headed for the door. Then I remembered I'd left my riding crop inside Lightning's stall. When I went to get my riding crop, Lightning was reckless and neighing. As I opened the stall door, the horse reared its hind legs and began kicking. He caught me on the forehead. My head still hurts when I think about it. I must have been out for hours. When I awoke, it was dawn. I could see that Lightning was inside his stall. Thomas Clive's lawyer remembered as Exhibit A a photograph of the stall as it appeared that morning. He also entered as Exhibit B a photograph of the baseball hat Thomas Chive was wearing at the time he suffered the head injury. Mr. Clive says that the horseshoe mark on the hat shows where Lightning kicked him. In his testimony, Howard Sim raised doubt about Clive's account of the accident. First, the question, and then his answer. Why do you question the facts of Tom Clive's story? Well, I didn't like Clive's attitude from the start. I knew he had had trouble with other owners, but I decided to hire him anyway. What made you change your mind? It was after Clive had his first workout with Lightning. He said my horse wasn't well trained. He called Lightning too wild to be a winner. Is that when you fired Mr. Clive? Sure, I didn't want a person like him riding Lightning. So I told the jockey he was finished. What was his reaction? He never expected me to fire him. When I told him I would get another jockey instead, Clive became very angry, and he said I would regret it. Howard Sim offered another explanation for the jockey's injury. I don't know why Tom Clive decided to pick up his riding things that night. I told him I'd send them the next day. He might have been trying to hurt Lightning. I can't say whether Lightning kicked the jockey or not, but if Clive was stupid enough to go into my stable after dark, he should have known it might be dangerous. Clive could have banged his head on anything. He would have had trouble walking through the stable in the dark. He entered Exhibit C on a photograph of Tom Clive's locker to prove his theory. Clive could easily have hit his head on that beam near his locker and used the accident to blame Lightning. He said he would get even with me. Maybe he even faked this whole thing. There are old shoe horses inside the barn. If Clive wanted to blame Lightning, all he had to do was find one and slam it into his baseball hat. You can't tell from the mark on Tom Clive's hat whether it was done by Lightning or not. Any old horseshoe could have done it. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have just heard the case of the high-kicking horse. You must decide the merit of Tom Clive's claim. Be sure to carefully examine the evidence in Exhibits A, B, and C. Did Lightning kick Tom Clive, or did the jockey fake the accident? What do you guys think? Comment below. He faked the accident. Want to know how I know it? Okay. Here's what I'm thinking. Okay, so this is how the horse was standing before the incident, and this is the baseball cap. Notice anything interesting? I'm thinking that it's impossible for the horse to have kicked him in the head to do this, because look at how the hooves on the horse are. They're like this. If the horse had bucked him in the head, the horseshoe on his baseball cap would be that of a U. But it's upside down, so unless he got bucked from the front and he forgot because, he got bucked in the head, there's no way that his story could be true. At least that's my thought. Let's see if that's right. Verdict. Tom Clive faked the horseshoe mark on the hat. The mark in Exhibit B shows the horseshoe had hit the hat with a downward blow. Clive overlooked the fact that the horses kick upward. If Lightning had kicked him, the horseshoe mark would have been turned upside down with the round part on the bottom. Yes, that's what I said. I finally got one of these. Right. Okay. Sweet. Of course, I feel like it took me a while to get one of the clue books solutions right anyway, but at least I got it this. Alright. The case of the leaky basement. This sounds like the most boring case ever. But alright. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, when an assignment is made in writing, it becomes a legal obligation. This is the point of law you must keep in mind today. George Clark, the plaintiff, agreed to buy a horse from Lester Loyne for $94,000. Mr. Clark then wrote a letter to Lester Loyne confirming their agreement. He enclosed a $1,000 check as a deposit. But Mr. Clark discovered the house was poorly built and withdrew his offer. He is suing Lester Loyne, the defendant, because Mr. Loyne won't return his deposit. Oh, okay. George Clark has testified as follows. When I first looked over Mr. Loyne's house, it seemed just what I wanted. Should not be just like what I wanted. Whatever. I liked the layout and its location. I agreed to his selling price provided. The house was inspected by a professional construction engineer. I didn't want any surprises after I bought it. Mr. Loyne told me he had others who wanted to purchase his house. He said that if I were serious about my offer, I should confirm it in writing and enclose $1,000 deposit. I agreed and sent him a letter the next day. Exhibit A is a check George Clark sent to Mr. Loyne. Mr. Clark hired a construction engineer to inspect the house. When the engineer brought the report to Mr. Clark's house, it was unsatisfactory. It seems Miss Loyne's house was built on land that was once a swamp. Hey, no shame in that. Disney World was built on what was once a swamp, I think. Yeah, Disney World was built on what once was a swamp. Disneyland was built on what used to be an orange grove, I believe. Or maybe I'm getting... No, I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Which is why, if you're a Disney nerd like me, you know that, Disney World is actually, like when you're in, Main Street, USA, you're one story up because of all the tunnels downstairs. Anywhoosies. Where was I? A heavy rain could cause basement flooding. Okay, yeah, now that's the problem. Yes. A real storm might even make the house float away. Yeah, I guess. The engineer showed Mr. Clark a picture he had taken of the watermarks in the basement. When the engineer showed him the photograph, George Clark immediately telephoned the owner. He told Lyon their deal was off and requested that he return the $1,000. When I told Lester Loyne I was withdrawing my offer, he warned me that if I did, I wouldn't get back my deposit. And he told me that I had agreed that money was his no matter what happened. He said, I wrote that in the letter I sent him. I couldn't believe it. I certainly never wrote any such a thing. I pulled out my checkbook to show the engineers that Lyon must have been mistaken. On the stub of the check, I had written a note to myself that it was a refundable deposit. The engineer took out his camera and photographed my checkbook. He said it would be important evidence if I ever had to go to court, which he did. His photograph was entered as Exhibit B. The engineer was sworn under oath that he was with George during the telephone conversation. Lester Loyne had a very different story to tell. When I put a note notice in the newspaper advertising my house for sale. 4 people called to say they were interested. I decided to sell my house Clark because he was the first to come over. When Mr. Clark and I agreed on the purchase price, I told him about the other people interested in buying it. I accepted his bid only when he agreed to send me the deposit. He knew he wouldn't get it back if he withdrew his offer. George Clark's letter accompanying the check. It appears as Exhibit C. It proves that Mr. Clark's purchase of the house, depending on the inspection by the professional engineer. Mr. Loyne's attorney has called your attention to the note. At the bottom of his letter, it clearly states that George Clark agreed that the deposit was not refundable. Mr. Clark claims he wrote the top part of the letter in Exhibit C, but not the wording at the bottom. He accuses Lester Loyne of introducing false evidence into the court. He claims Mr. Loyne added the bottom section after he received George Clark's letter. Lester Loyne was able to get another buyer for his house. It was sold as the same price as George Clark's offer, but he refused to return the $1,000. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have just heard the case of the leaky basement. Do they really give cases names like that in court? I just gotta know. Somebody who knows stuff about law and courts and stuff. Do they actually really name cases in courts like this? You must decide the merit of George Clark's claim. Be sure to carefully examine the evidence in A, B, and C. Can Lester Loyne keep the $1,000 deposit, or did he add the wording to George Clark's letter? Now, I think if this is the case, it should be an open and shut case. All you have to do is look at the letter and see if the handwriting at the top is different from the handwriting at the bottom. I feel like this really shouldn't even be a court case. I feel like the police could have just looked at the letter and been like, oh, if this is if George Clark is really doing this wrong thing, then I feel like the police would just be able to be like, oh, there's 2 different kinds of handwriting here. Obviously, George Clark is faking this and Lester Loyne is in the right. So I feel like that would be, almost too easy to bring to court, But who knows? I don't know a lot about court cases and all that, so. Okay. Okay. So, here's the check. And, so here's the check and the checkbook. Oh, and the typewriter. Oh. Oh. Okay, well that throws my theory out the window. It's a typed. But you can definitely see, maybe it's just supposed to be like creases in the paper, but it definitely looks like somebody cut like a section of the paper out and taped like another section in. Of course, maybe those are just supposed to be crease lines, but I really don't think it is. Wait a second. Nope, they're the same. I was thinking maybe the signatures could be different, like the signature on the check and then the signature at the bottom of the letter, but no, it looks about the same. Call me crazy, but I feel like when I was in school learning about, the right way to write a business letter, I feel like PS was not included there. Like, I feel like PS is reserved for, like, sending a letter to a friend or sending a letter to a family member. I feel like PS isn't considered professional, But that's just me. There's something I'm missing here. But what? It's something in the font or something. I know it. The same. Wait. I'll be right back. I have a theory, but I want to check my facts before I make a move and say it out loud. Thought I had it, but I didn't. I don't know what I am missing, what I'm missing. So I'm just gonna read the verdict. But before I do, comment below what you think the solution is. Verdict. Lester Loin typed the bottom of the letter. The bottom sentence of the letter in Exhibit C contains asterisks, but the photograph in Exhibit B shows that George Clark's typewriter does not have an asterisk key. Objection! In the picture in question, some keys are not in frame. The asterisk key could have easily been one of these keys out of frame, which is what I assumed. For this solution to work and be solvable, the whole key of the typewriter needed to be in view. Sure, maybe someone who's reading this would just assume, oh, those keys that are out of frame, they're the asterisk keys. But you can't assume stuff like that in a real court. You can't. You have to have concrete evidence. And concrete evidence isn't assuming that a key that is not in the picture is an asterisk key. Unless you have, like, the actual typewriter in your possession or something and be like, oh, the key that's not in this picture, it's the asterisk key. Then that doesn't work. What?
Obviously the trash is still out, but I was just saying, you don't have your dishes out. I'm taking care of them. And hon, I appreciate your ingenuity, but you're gonna have a spill, and it's gonna be bad. And I want you to toast all over your eyes if you want to.
Okay, 1 second. Oh, wait. But yeah, but for that to work, we would have to be able to see all the keys. You can't rule out the fact that this typewriter we see doesn't have an asterisk key when not all the keys are in frame. It's just not right. So that's the solution to that, and I'm going to get to the next mystery in the next part of reading this book. I will see you guys then.